June events in Authentically Us, a space for LGBTQIA+ women at all stages of coming out and beyond. Monday, June 2nd at 7 p.m. Central, Messy Middle Mutual Support Group. Wednesday, June 4th and 25th at noon Central, The Thin Place, Where the Sacred Meets Us Softly, a group for the spiritually curious. Thursday, June 12th at 7 p.m. Central, Cultivating Body Confidence for LGBTQIA+ women. Thursday, June 19th at 7 p.m. Central, Sitting with Difficult Emotions, Learning Processes for Emotional Flexibility. All of these events and more are available to all Authentically Us members. Join now and your first month membership is free. Learn more about Authentically Us by visiting annemariezanzel.com. That's www.annemariezanzel.com. Hey queer friends and allies, welcome to Season 6 of Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA+ stories. Here's your host, Annemarie Zanzel.
Hi, this is Annemarie Zanzel, and I want to welcome you back to another episode of Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA stories. I'm so excited because I get to talk to another ex-pastor today who was in the evangelical world for a very, very long time and has since come out as gay. My guest, Mike Maeshiro. He is a gay ex-pastor and is now a consultant for queer and deconstructing Christians. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Anne-Marie. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. So my first question for everybody that I interview is, tell me your story.
Oh, God. Yeah, it's a simple question. The short version of my story is, and I'm assuming you'll poke at things, but I was 4 when I was taken to church for the first time. And I was a Baptist it was a independent fundamentalist Baptist church, which is very...
That's more than Southern Baptist.
Yeah.
That's very conservative.
Very conservative. I was in Guam.
You were in Guam. So were your parents missionaries?
No, my mom was raised in Guam. She moved there when she was 7 because her dad was the dean of the university. And my dad moved there when he was 20 to study English. My dad is Japanese. My mom is white. And then they found each other and got married and then had my sisters and me. So we were locals. We were non-military, non-missionary people. Just very random.
All right. So your parents took you to an independent Baptist church.
Yeah.
Let me quick question. Were either of them religious before they took you to the church? Like, were they raised in religion or anything like that?
No. I mean, my dad was culturally, Japan is very Shintoist. So he had that as a background, but it wasn't something that he subscribed to really. My mom was not raised religious. So they both found evangelicalism actually like through the business world. They had business partners that were very evangelical and got them in that way. So yeah, I was not raised religious. They weren't raised religious. And I was 4 when they first decided to join the church. Mm-hmm. They were both pretty spiritual people. They both had a lot of spiritual experiences. So I think they were pretty open or considerate, but not looking. And then at some point in their life, it became a point where they wanted to seek it out.
Were you and your sisters young then?
So I have an older and a younger sister. My younger sister was not born yet, but my older sister was 7. I was 4.
No, that's fairly typical for like parents. They're like looking for some sort of moral structure to raise their children in.
Yeah.
I did that. I went back to the Catholic Church when I was pregnant with my oldest child, because for me, Catholicism, especially when I was young, because I grew up in a very chaotic home, church and school, I went to Catholic school, was a place of certainty for me in the sense that I knew the rules, I knew what to do to succeed, and I knew what to do to win praise. And so church was actually for me was a place of safety. And I want to also a name that it isn't for a lot of people, but for me it was.
It's a great place to compete. If you're a competitor, there's a lot of structure to navigate and rules to win by. Mm-hmm. Yeah, anyway, so I got saved when I was 4 because I didn't want to burn in hell for eternity. And I learned a lot of information that first Sunday morning. And then they put me in private school like immediately. So I started going to that same church's private school. Our teachers had paddles. Like I got spanked. It was strange, terrifying. And then, we're going to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, went youth group on Wednesday night, every week. Like that was constant. So raised in the church. And then when I was 10, I knew around 5, 6-ish that I was not like the other boys. Like something was different about me and I wasn't sure what it was. I knew it wasn't good. Like people hated it about me, or like boys especially didn't like whatever was different about me. I was too soft. I was too gentle. I was too accommodating to girls. Like I don't know. There were just these things that I was paying attention to. Like why am I like this? Why is this a problem? Why do I want to be Ariel in The Little Mermaid? Why is that a problem? But why do I want that? It's just back and forth conflict. When I was 10, I was in the bathroom by myself and I had this epiphany. And I don't know why in that moment, but I realized, but the thing that's different about me, we have a word for. I'm gay. And it was like this terrifying realization because I didn't want to be. Yeah, right. It's being raised in the church in fundamentalist Baptist, being gay
Well,
is like the worst.
especially an independent I've had several clients that have been an independent fundamentalist, and I have a good friend, actually, we came out at the same time, and she was the mother of 5, and she came out at 38, and she was an independent fundamentalist Baptist, and it cost her a lot. It
Yeah.
cost her a real
Yeah.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I knew to hate gay people before I realized I was one of them. And it was terrifying and isolating. And I decided in that moment that I would never tell anybody, like I was gonna take this to the grave. And my thought was like, I guess I'll probably end up marrying a woman and just faking it and making it work. Or maybe I'll be single, but that'll be really embarrassing. I don't know. And then I just ignored it and moved. Then when I was 12, I started fooling around with my best friend who was a guy. And we fooled around for 2.5 years. We never talked about it, but I was in love with this person and I didn't know what he was thinking because we never talked about it. But anyway, then I had a ton of shame by the time I turned 15. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I cut him out of my life. And I was actively a leader in my youth group at church and continuously growing in my knowledge of the Lord, right? And wrestling with the theology at that age too, and just learning all the right answers. And then when I was 18, I had a radical experience at church. We had shifted over to a non-denominational church by then, and we had moved to Oregon. So we were in the
So
main.
you in a more liberal church than you were in Guam?
Sure, they wouldn't. The church wasn't liberal, but compared to the church I was at, sure, they're leaning.
So going from independent Baptist to non-denominational, typically they're a little bit more progressive.
Yeah. There's a spectrum. They're incrementally moving toward the left.
They have a woman who teaches Sunday school.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We had the woman leading, who was the pastor of the children's direct ministry. She was the director. But anyway. So yeah, leaning more in the more progressive direction. Anyway, had this radical experience during a worship service, or just during the worship set of a service, where I started experiencing what I would call the presence of God. I didn't know how else to describe it. And I also didn't have a precedent for this. I didn't know that you could experience God, God was a very heady intellectual concept at that point, and I knew I was supposed to believe that God was a being who loved us, right? God was the Father, and God was Jesus, and whatever. But I was having a intense personal experience that was deeply emotional with this being who loved me, who was persuaded about me individually, specifically, and I didn't have a grid for that, and I was weeping and I didn't have language for what was happening. And then 8 months later it happened again, but then the second time, more expressly, I heard God in my spirit. I don't, people can filter this however they need to. I don't need anyone to believe or agree.
Talking to somebody who's had those experiences, so I get it. I get it.
People who don't, that's not their background or not their experience. I want to just acknowledge, listen, I don't need you to agree that this was God or.
Absolutely. Not everybody this is why I sucked at being an evangelical, Mike, is that I believed everybody has their own path to go on and that they should walk their own path with God and or the higher power, the ultimate concern. That's why I totally sucked as an evangelical.
It's not evangelical of you.
No, it's not, and I don't care. I'm not evangelical, but I still believe that we all have our own walk through this world, and sometimes our walks take us with spirituality and faith, and sometimes they don't, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's not my job to judge.
Right. Same. Agreed. So my path, had these
Intense religious experiences.
I would say spiritual, it was deeply spiritual. And in this second experience, I heard God say to me in my person, however this works, that they wanted me to be gay. And I knew God was not allowed to say that to me. That did not
So
fly.
did you think it was the devil?
I did not. I knew it was God. I knew it was not. This was not the devil. Because it wasn't just information. Before that moment happened, I was deeply humbled and repentant before this holy, kind, innocent, humble person who loved me and all of us and was love itself and was being itself. Yeah.
Was it a person though?
I don't it wasn't I no, it wasn't a person, it was a I don't
I always call it like an energy or a spirit or
yeah,
some
it
it's like
was some I would use the word presence, it was a b
yeah, because like it's when you have something so spiritual, you can't use words to describe it. That's really hard.
and
Yeah.
because it's such an isolating experience already, you're like, "What is happening to me?" And then you can't talk about it because you don't know how to convey this to people, and when you say words, when you try, people translate it to mean something you're not saying, and then they try and give you advice or judge what happened to you based on something they're not even accurately understanding, and you're like, "Oh." Anyways, I was like weepy and like confused a little bit. I was not confused at what I heard or what I experienced. I was confused at how to reconcile what I understood about the Bible or what my pastors were saying or what my church community was saying to me because it directly contradicted what I had heard from God. And I didn't know how to make the two work together. And I deeply regarded and was loyal to this conviction I experienced from God. But the culture and the theology and the dogma was so much more pervasive and persistent in my life, so I just never told anybody.
Well, yeah, you were conditioned. You were conditioned to believe a certain thing about the presence. You were conditioned to believe that there was only a certain way to live. And people who are Bible thumpers will argue with me about that, but it is conditioning. It is teaching a
Sure.
way to live that it's very heteronormative.
Yeah.
It's like there's only one way to live and that's it. And that doesn't it's actually not how the universe works. The universe actually thrives on diversity. But I'm never going to waste my energy arguing with people about that
Yeah.
because they're never going to agree with me.
Right.
So
I
yeah.
mean, the reason they think that is not based on logic or reason or data, or proof. It's based on insistence and propaganda, right? So you can't argue with them.
And it's also really based on the fact that what's really interesting to me about being in the evangelical church, different than UCC or Catholic Church or the Catholic Church of the 70s, was that I was allowed to question. I was always allowed to question. Like Doubting Thomas is like one of my favorite characters, And so I was always allowed to question. And what I found in working with very conservative people, religiously conservative people, is that they were taught that to question means a lack of faith. Can I ask you, how did you feel about gay people before you came out?
I was afraid of gay people. I was homophobic. I was afraid of them. I was judgy of them. I don't know if I should say that I was disgusted, but I think there was something there. Like I learned to be disgusted with gay people. I'm not trying to throw my mom under the bus. I've done that enough, and that's not really something I want to do. But like growing up, my mom would anytime anything gay would be present in our living room, specifically because it was on TV. Probably she would visibly, dramatically demonstrate overt disgust. Gross, sick, turn that off. Oh, that's disgusting. Like constant. That's all she would ever do if anything gay.
Well, that's part of your conditioning too, right? I mean, like we're conditioned to be nobody's born a homophobic. We're conditioned to be homophobic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know where she learned that, or probably culturally, right? But like that was my dad didn't really do.
Maybe she has those feelings herself.
Maybe, yeah.
And she's in a culture where she can't express that. And so I find that people who are so like Mike Pence, who are so anti-gay, they're the people that are struggling with those feelings themselves. And they're in places where they can't express those feelings. And then it turns outward and toxic towards other people.
So for whatever reason, my mom was demonstrating that overt attitude. So I think that, as a kid being close to my mom, I just kind of absorbed that as like a rubric or
Mhm,
guideline or whatever.
mhm.
Because that's what was shown to me as what was the right way to be in life. So anyway, I think that was a big part of how I was perceiving gay people. I was terrified of them. I would not admit that, and also disgusted. But like not because I viscerally was, it was practicing a disgust, right? So yeah, that was generally how I and then I think underneath all that there was an intrigue and an allure, obviously, like but I could not admit that. So
So you hear from this energy that you're gay.
I mean, I knew I was gay. They wanted me to be gay, is what I was hearing. They wanted me like that, right? And I was like, well, you can't want that, right? Anyway, then we're gonna skip a bunch of drama, but like for the next 14 years, I would have 8 more experiences like that where this presence would show up at different points in my journey and continue to affirm my gay identity. And I would weep and I would use the word repent and like submit to whoever this person, what this being was in my life, God. But I would never do anything about the gay thing. I would never say anything out loud about it or like act on it, right, or look at it even. I would just take what I was experiencing from God and apply it to other aspects of my spirituality and like
Yeah. Did you say celibate the whole time, or
yeah, I was deep. I was very celibate. I forced myself to date 2 different women over the next 10 plus years.
and you were so good at chastity.
I was. I mean, yeah, purity culture, I was winning.
All my, clients that went through purity culture, they always laugh about how good they were because they were like, "I had no interest being with boys. I was the chastest girl out there." because
Yeah. I'm like, what is wrong with all you dudes? You guys need to get a grip. Like you're so out
Yeah,
of
you just didn't understand. Well, what we talk about in our community is that a lot of times we just didn't understand because a lot of us are conditioned to act a certain way. So, for example, like, I remember being 14 and my friends had all these pictures of guys on their walls I was like, what's the point? You're never going to meet them. And I literally couldn't understand. Now I understand. They had them on their walls because they were attracted to them and they made them feel good inside. And I was clueless. I was clueless, you know?
that's
So
hilarious.
so you
Yeah.
make it to your 34. You
Well, so
are
yeah, I moved to Japan for 6 months to do this like spiritual pilgrimage, basically, and I did a discipleship training school with YWAM, and then that was the first charismatic thing I've experienced, and that kind of prepared me for moving to Redding, California, to be part of Bethel Church. So I went to Bethel, did first and second year in their ministry school, and then got kicked out of school on the last day because a friend of mine outed me.
were you out at that point?
No, I wasn't out. I confided in this person in first year because I thought she could. So you have to understand, Bethel has a supernatural bent to it. So people who are attracted to and subscribe to Bethel culture and teaching and whatever are looking for supernatural Christianity. Like
Yes.
yeah, prophecy, healing, tongues. So I confided in this friend because she was a spooky kind of Christian. Like we were at Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry, and she was spooky among that group. Like the girl knew stuff that she should not have known, and she was consistent, and I could not figure out how she knew the things that she knew about people. And she just would say these things out loud with zero proof. I'm like, you can't just say this about people. I would get mad at her and then she would be right. It would just consistently demonstrate this really bizarre accuracy around reading people and like predicting their behavior. Anyway, I pulled her aside and was like, hey, so when I was in middle school, I fooled around with my best friend, and sometimes, the tendencies still rear up, and I would love to not be struggling with this anymore. I also don't find women attractive. Like if I could be healed here, that would be like incredible. So I asked her to pray for me. I asked her to do like a certain kind of prayer style that Bethel taught for inner healing called sozo. So she sozoed me. Nothing happened, but anyway, she knew about my deep dark secret. And then for the next year and a half, she would pressure me to stand up at altar calls when a leader at the church would be like calling gay people to stand and repent and be healed. And I knew better. I was like, I'm not going to stand and like publicly humiliate myself in front of all these homophobic people and then have them pray for me and for nothing to happen. Like I didn't say any of this out loud, but like, that's where my reasoning was coming from. And
You're like, "I'm not gonna be healed from this."
yeah, there's no healing that's going to happen. And also there will be a lot of,
To be healed.
say it again.
I don't need to be healed. I'm
Well,
fine.
that's not what I was thinking at the time. I thought I wanted to be healed, but
I know that, but now you know better.
yeah. Anyway, so she ended up, as she watched me not stand up for these altar calls or go seek counseling or whatever, she basically outed me at the end of the year because I wasn't morally aligning with, what a student at Bethel was supposed to be doing. And so I got kicked out. And that was humiliating and painful and I would say traumatizing, actually. And then I worked it out with the leader who kicked me out. Several friends were like, "What happened? Why'd you get kicked out? This makes no." Because I was celibate. I was a sexless being. There was no deviancy going on, So they're like, "How did you get kicked out of school?" I'm like, no. So I talked to the guy, confronted him. He apologized, gave me my diploma, and then shortly after that, I got hired on staff at the church that kicked me out of the school. So I worked there, and then I started working my way through the environment and the accolades and whatever. And the short version is I ended up like teaching in the school that kicked me out and mentoring interns and taking mission trips with students. And then I started traveling and speaking and, like living the dream of what I'd been working toward, and all of that with me being deeply in the closet. And so then, fast forward years of this going on, I loved my life, except for I was deeply lonely and like trapped, like the more successful I became and the more public and the bigger my platform grew, weightier the closet doors became on my conscience. And you have to realize also in the background behind all this experience were these deep spiritual experiences with who I knew God to be, affirming me as a gay person. And I'm over here continuously denying that. So it all came to a head. It started on February 1st of 2020. I watched Taylor Swift's documentary, Miss Americana, on Netflix, and she goes hard about gay rights in that movie. And I was not expecting it. And I was watching it alone in my house. And I felt, as she was going off, I felt what I would acknowledge as spiritual conviction in that moment. I was like, this girl knows something that I don't. She understands something. She's touched something that I haven't, and I'm on the wrong side of this. And it wasn't like, oh, gay people are good. It wasn't that jump. It was something about what she's saying is true, and I'm missing something, and it's bothering me. 2 weeks later, I'm like pacing in my living room, praying about some difficulties I'm having with leaders at Bethel and how I'm being unjustly treated for logistical things and whatever. And then I get interrupted by a passage in Acts 10. I had to like look it up in Google to read the whole thing, but it's the story where Peter goes up on the roof and falls into a trance and the sheet comes down from heaven, right? And there's animals in there that Jewish people can't eat. And God says, rise, Peter.
That they don't have to be kosher anymore.
Yeah.
And
Rise, Peter, kill, eat, right? Don't call anything unclean, I've made clean. Happens 3 times, the sheet goes up. And so I realized in that moment, whatever's happening with this random story is the same experience I was having with Taylor Swift 2 weeks ago. And then 3 weeks later, I'm in the back of my neighborhood running around like upset. And I'm literally yelling in the woods because I'm so distraught by what's happening with my role at Bethel and whatever. And then I get interrupted again. And this was not common, but like another passage in the Gospels struck me. I pulled it up. It's in Luke. Jesus is rebuking the teachers of the law. And it ends with, you prevent people from entering the kingdom while you yourselves refuse to enter. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back and changed my life. It was a lot of buildup until that final moment. It wasn't that moment by itself, right? But in that moment, I could not escape the accusation, the conviction that I was preventing queer people from entering the kingdom, while I also, as a queer person, was refusing to enter it because I knew in my spirit, deep down, whatever, that the kingdom was different than what Bethel was preaching. I knew the kingdom was not white, heterosexist patriarchy. I knew the kingdom was everyone and like including people like me, and that God's eye and hand was on these people, and that I was one of those people, and I had been denying it for so long. And then that story of Moses when he rose up and killed that Egyptian for beating on a Hebrew. I'm like, oh, this is exactly what I haven't been doing. I've been watching queer people being dehumanized and harmed through conversion therapy for years. I myself went through a bunch of conversion therapy stunts at Bethel, and I said nothing, and I enabled it, and I partnered with it, and I was platformed by this institution that's doing this to people like me, and it's not okay. And yet, what am I doing? Look at my life. Look at, And so I had to make this really intense, scary, avoided decision to finally divest from all of the success and fame and money that came from being who and what I was at Bethel. And I knew like if I were to make this choice, I was going to lose all of it. Everything I'd been building for the last however many years was going to go away. And it wasn't just like professional or like career oriented stuff. It was also like relationships and community and safety and belonging and identity. Yeah, all those things were going to go away.
you were going to lose your community.
Yeah, I was going to lose all that. I was going to lose who I was. Like, who am I? Apart from all this that I've built and been part of, like what's left, right? Like it was terrifying. It was a terrifying prospect. I knew underneath all that, like, of course, there's something more to me than any of this, and I'd survive it. But like, how much pain and how much loss would I have to go through? Who wants to say yes to that, right? So I cried a lot, and for months, I just kind of.
You know what passage, Mike, really helped me with that? Because I came out a month after I was ordained, and watching my pictures with me and my ex-husband and my 4 children. I got ordained May 1st, 2016, and I had come out for the final time, the third and final time. It was a process. It was 10 years. It took me a long time. Seeing those pictures of my ordination, I'm in my robes, I have my stole on, my ex-husband is there, my 4 children. Those are the most painful pictures because they are the before. And once I came out, not that now, ironically, my church experience was actually pretty good because I was in a progressive church. I had been a pastor there for years. I actually pastored 2 different churches from 2 different denominations on 2 different sides of the hill. One hill was the evangelical church, one was the UCC. And I had played role as a pastor in both of those. And so the UCC church was actually quite wonderful. So I was very lucky with my church, but everything else, I lost. Who am I? I'd been married for 26 years. I was the mother of 4 kids. I was a pastor of a church. I was a hospice chaplain for 7 years. Like, who am I, now that I am saying I am not a straight married woman anymore. So I feel you and I completely understand. It's like your identity's gone. And so the passage that helped me when uh, a rich man comes to him and Jesus says, he says, "What do I need to do to follow you?" And you have to give up everything. And so sometimes my process of coming out later in life and accepting the fact that I'd been a long time lesbian, that I had to lose everything to find me, help heal the world, because I believe that when we live our most authentic lives, the world would be a much better place if we all could just live authentically and who we are and who we were created to be. That passage really helped me a lot because I feel like I'm really following in the footsteps of Jesus more as a queer person, not as a Christian, or as a as more as a follower of Jesus more as a queer person than I did when I had all the trappings of straight ministerial life.
Same. Yeah, same. Oh, same. So I spent the next few months coming out to close friends.
Yeah.
And then it's over the next 9 months, I would be coming out to people, but also I started reading like crazy. I got a bunch of books and started listening to podcasts and finding other voices of people who were doing inclusion work for queer people within the evangelical world or just theology in general. And I was shocked at what I found. Like there's a lot of
There's a lot
solid
of stuff.
scholarship. Yeah. And I was like, and I'd never seen any of this. I'd never heard any of these people's names before. And we are not, because Bethel, like in the school specifically, there's a whole week they do on human sexuality. And it's all just homophobic, heterosexist propaganda, taking anecdotes and things out of context.
Do they do a lot of Jim Dobson stuff?
No, I don't remember who they subscribed to and what references they were using anymore. But I also don't remember why I brought this up.
But you said that you were talking about how you started to search
Oh,
theology and
yeah,
you realize there's like all these queer theologians out there. There's all kinds of different faith traditions that, are very inclusive, things like that, that you didn't.
yeah, and like specifically, even within the theology that I was trained in, I was like, people are using our concepts and understanding and like liberating queer people and using the Bible to justify inclusion and like and I got started getting really angry. I was like, we are not intellectually honest about what we're doing. We have not, we're not even some of these questions I'd never even asked myself as a gay person. I'm like, anyway, so I just
Can you give me an
well,
example?
like for example, like Matthew Vines, for example, I read his book God and the Gay Christian, and he had several questions that I was like, yeah, that's a really good question. Looked a lot at like the impact that was had on queer people under the exclusive theology of evangelicalism, and how like the mental anguish and the suicidality and just the all the social and emotional harm that we undergo. He's like, this is bad fruit, and like their experience needs to be regarded. And I'm like, I never once considered my experience as valid information for how we handle theology. That was never on the table. And like, where's the compassion in this? And I just like had to grieve at just looking at how dehumanizing I was to myself
Mhm.
in how I handled this stuff. He also talked about like the gift of celibacy and how like that was a gift that was bestowed on people by God's grace. And you can't mandate a spiritual gift for a whole people group when that's not how spiritual gifts work. I'm like, what the? It's clearly here.
It's also using their theology to turn their theology upside down on their head, which that a lot of times as in progressive Christianity, people who are evangelical just totally dismiss us even before we start talking because, we're not we're selling false religion or something like that. And what I love is when people like God and the Gay Christian, there's a couple other books out there that where they take the theology that people are used to and then reframe it in a different way, which can be life changing and life altering.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, the more books I read, the more I dove into it, the more like the angrier I was becoming. I was like, we are hypocrites and we are not justified in how harmful we've been to people like me and what I've been part of. And anyway, I ended up moving across the country because I found a man who was doing queer inclusion within the evangelical lane, and he was brilliant and unlike anyone I'd heard up to that point. And he was in Nashville. So I got a hold of him, thankfully, through. So there's a man named Stan Mitchell here in Nashville that I was like, I need
Is
this
he with
person.
Vanderbilt or something like that?
He has some relationships with Vanderbilt, but he founded Grace Point, a church here in Nashville. So anyway, I got around Stan, and he was one of a few different counselors I had and advisors and mentors in this process because I was going to come out publicly, and I still had my Bethel platform, and the majority of my audience were charismatic evangelicals. So in 2022, on February 1st, kind of the anniversary of that Taylor Swift moment, I came out publicly. I shot a YouTube video and put it on all my socials, and then it was a nightmare, and people were horrible. And I was being told some horrible things regularly for months, like multiple times a day, every day for months. You're demon possessed, you're deceived, you're a liar, you're a hypocrite, you're a false prophet, you're a false teacher, you're leading people astray, you're worshiping Satan, just you're a pedophile, like all these horrible, and I could get more explicit, but it's just like that stuff. And my mental health began to tank. It was like, it's unnatural for any human being to see that kind of stuff targeting you for months. Anyway, so I had to adjust my lifestyle. I got a therapist, started going on walks, I started going to the gym, I started intentionally like spending time with friends. Like, not that I wasn't doing some of that stuff already, but like I started getting like regimented and like I have to do this no matter how I feel. And so there's a lot of pain and loss, but then also there's a lot of beauty on the other side. Personally, obviously, the liberation and embodiment that I got to experience, finding safety in myself.
Like, how old are you when you came out? Like, officially?
When I came out publicly, was 33.
Okay, so you were still really young. I mean, that to me is young because I came out at 52. So, yeah,
Okay.
so
See, I
yeah.
feel like I came out late too, but we were different versions of late.
Well, yeah. Well, later in life is self-defined. So my youngest clients are 25 and my oldest clients are over 70. So this is something that doesn't go away.
Yeah. Right. Clearly. Yeah. You and I both know that. Yeah.
So that's like, first of all, I just want to take a step back and talk about, did anyone prepare you for the vitriol?
People tried. Do you know who Kathy Baldock is?
Mm-mm. I
Okay,
know.
there's a woman named Kathy Baldock, and she's featured in the movie 1946.
Okay.
Her work. Anyway, Kathy is a friend, and she was probably the most explicit of anyone I was listening to who was like warning me the evangelicals are going to be the worst. They are going to be vicious. And like I believed her, but I did not get it to the degree that she was communicating and that I experienced. Like everything she said was completely true, but it was worse than I expected. And I think I did even tell her at the time, like, I thought I'd be different because these people had been following me for a while. They knew my journey. They trusted me. They had a relationship with me. I thought that my story and experience would be a game changer for them. And she's like, Mike. And I'm like, Kathy, she's like, okay, maybe. And she was right and I was wrong. And for the majority of people watching and listening to me, who I was and the work I'd been doing meant nothing. The moment I became affirming of the queer community and accepting of myself as a gay man, everything I'd been and done disappeared. Didn't matter, was irrelevant. That's not true for everybody. It's true for the majority of the people. There were some people in my life who actually changed their minds and became affirming, and like it changed their lives because of their trust and respect in me and the work that they did as a result. But they were exceptions for sure.
How was your personal family? Like your mom and your dad?
Yeah, my younger sister is like one of my biggest supporters, and she's an ally. And she was actually the first person I told. She and I have been close for our whole lives. My older sister, I think, is sympathetic. She probably pities me, I would not consider her like an ally, but she's not a hater. I think she theologically thinks that queer people are deranged or
They go to
evil.
hell. Yeah.
Sure, probably. But she, so like relationally, isn't going to say anything like that. My parents super disappointed. They don't agree. They think I'm deceived. They think I think they're past this now. But for years, they thought it was a phase. They thought that I would get over this or I'd change my mind. They were praying. I have to have kids, so of course this isn't true. This isn't God's will for my life. We fought. I went no contact with my mom for 6 months in 2023, which I'd never done before. It was really painful and weird, but necessary because she would not listen. Like it didn't matter what I told her or what. Anyway, so we are now at a place where they pretend like I never told them and that it's not true. They don't ask about my personal life or my work anymore. I used to be like somebody they were super proud of because I was like this Bethel person and like their home church would have me come and speak. And there's, and so they like didn't know what to do with how like celebrated I was. And now that I'm a pariah, they just pretend like it never happened, which was so painful for years. It was infuriating and painful.
I understand. Yeah.
Now, thankfully, for some reason, I've done a lot of work. And one of the things that I remember being a marking change for me in this was reading the book Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents.
Yeah.
That book was game changer for me. Mm-hmm. Really helped me understand my parents, specifically my mom, in like a different light and recognizing some of her own psychosis and like mental like ability and it became a lot less personal.
I think as like When we hit a lot of us, when we hit our 30s, we realize our parents are just human beings trying to figure everything out, just like
I was 33 when I came out, and so then I started to get, like, ragey. I'm like, "What are you talking about? How can you say that to me? Are you not listening to anything I'm saying?" You know? It took me a couple of years in my 30s to, like, get there.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
coming out, like, when you did that coming out post, that was just part of the whole process. I mean, coming out later in life, I would say typically takes people about 5 years from the start to where they come out and they're completely comfortable with who they are, you know? And where your straight life starts to fade into the background, like, you remember it, but your lens has so totally shifted from a heteronormative lens to a queer lens that, so I had 4 kids. I had checked all the boxes that you possibly could check in this life to be considered successful, and I still wasn't happy. And I was still there was something missing, and like a lot of the women I work with, we keep getting education, we keep, getting different careers. I'm a second career minister too. So I've done all those things and I still couldn't find that missing piece. And the missing piece was actually the piece I knew about, but I just didn't want to accept about myself. So I was somebody that always sort of kind of knew I was gay. Sounds like it's very similar to you. Always kind of sort of knew I was gay, but accepting it was another thing about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, so now my parents and I don't know, we're in, like, this strange, delicate space. Yeah, they fell apart, and then so I had been out for 2 years before I came out publicly, right? And I'd been like,
Yeah. I was
sprinting.
3 years before I came out publicly.
Yeah, I had been sprinting that whole time, like, just voraciously consuming information, and I started deconstructing as well while that happened. Like, I started jumping into other parts of my theology that weren't working anymore, that didn't make any sense. So my worldview changed so drastically, and then when I came out publicly, I also announced, like, all the work that I was doing, the advocacy, the content creation, the coaching, and consulting. I was like, I am going to prioritize the queer community and queer people because this is not okay and it needs to be addressed and corrected. And so, overnight, like, my work and the coaches that work with me, their clientele, like, was starting to shift very quickly, which was difficult at first. Like, we lost a lot of business and didn't make up for it right away. And so there was, like, struggle, and we all knew that. We had several meetings and had some people come in to speak to our team, and we were all, like, emotionally and economically preparing for this huge rift. So that was painful and dramatic and lasted for longer than we wanted it to. But yeah, over the last several years, like, it has changed, and now, like, that is the emphasis of our work, and we aren't as lucrative as we used to be. Our clientele is so different. We used to, like, work with conservative white evangelicals in their spirituality, right? Like, it was a very lucrative market, and we are no longer catering to that people. We're not serving that group of people. Yeah.
So, Joe, I want to ask you a question. When you say deconstruction, let's talk about what you mean about that. So, when you are talking about deconstruction, I use the word all the time. What do you mean by deconstruction?
Yeah, loosely, I mean returning to fundamental core beliefs you have about, specifically about theology, religion, your religion, and questioning, is this true? Why is this true? How do I know this is true? And if it's not true, what does that mean then, right? Like, how does that change my orthopraxy? How does it change how I'm showing up in the world and things that I'm subscribing to and who I'm aligned with and the associations I have and things I'm complicit with? Like, to me, there are necessary, like, ethical consequences and cascades that come from discoveries in that space. But deconstruction to me is like getting to the root core of your beliefs and finding out, doing more due diligence this second time around. Like, is this actually true? I know I was told this first when I was 5 and had no, like, ability cognitively to even question or challenge it. But now that I can think through this critically, is this true still for me? And if not, what is true, right? That's what I mean. And so that, to me, deconstruction goes in lots of different directions depending on who you are and where you come from and what your goal is.
So, people coming from the evangelical church, what is the biggest things they have to deconstruct?
God, I love that question. And I'm like, how do I answer this shortly? I mean, to me, there's like 19 different huge things. I'll try to.
Number one, all right, because I know with the community that I work with, the typical questions they ask, and what we do. But when you are working with somebody that is evangelical, let's tell me the top three.
The first emotional one that needs to be addressed is hell. The threat of eternal conscious torment is real for people in the evangelical
Yeah, it's
world. And
existential. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
it is haunting and traumatizing. So even if that's not like the most pinning pillar type parts of the theology, it is one of the most impactful. So I find that hell is often a first place that needs to be addressed. So that's a big
So
one.
luckily, I stopped believing in hell about 20 years ago.
Yeah, good for you. I would highly recommend everyone stop believing in hell. It's
Well,
good
it's
for you.
only a way to it's a way to control people. The threat of internal
Right.
damnation.
Right.
Hell
Yeah.
is never Jews don't believe in hell. It doesn't exist in the Jewish religion. The reason why I don't believe in hell is how can you reconcile a loving God, a loving being, a loving universe with the existence of hell and the torment of souls? You can't. There's no way you
Right.
can do it.
Yeah,
Now,
it's logically
what's
impossible. Yeah.
problematic for me when we think about God's grace, what's problematic for me is then that God's grace applies to everyone, even people that are evil and bad. And that's where I really struggle. But I accept that. But I really struggle.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because we want people to be punished. Like,
Yeah.
so if I don't believe in hell, then people that are doing evil things in this world right now are not going to hell. They may come back in another body in another existence that's hellish, but they're not going to hell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
what's the other couple of
The
things?
next one is going to be the Bible. Is it the inerrant, infallible word of God? Did God possess people's bodies and ink down exactly what they wanted to be said? That sounds crazy, but that's actually what evangelicals believe, even if they wouldn't say it that way. So, having to tackle like, is the Bible this cosmic, mystical, untouchable document that prescribes from a literalist interpretation how we're supposed to be human? That needs to be addressed, deconstructed. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And then the next big one, and then we'll just leave it. This will be the big three. Is then Jesus? Like, what did Jesus do? What was the point of his death? Because then underneath that is sin, and in sin nature, that's
Blown away about my ordination paper because I said in my ordination and paper that I didn't believe that Jesus died for our sins. And I don't believe that. As somebody who's worked with people who have grieving for years and years and years, I look at Jesus's death and what happened after as people who are grieving something that they didn't expect to happen. So like normal humans, they try to make meaning of it and they went back and they found meaning of Jesus's. So I had a pastor that used to say in the UCC, that I'm a daughter of God, just as Jesus was the son of God. And she said, with a small d. So, do I believe Jesus is the son of God? Yes, just like I'm a daughter of God. I'm curious what you believe.
same. I
Yeah,
would agree with what you just said,
yeah, yeah.
which is heretical to evangelicals. Like,
It's so heretical.
you're no longer a part of us. You're an immediate other the moment you say that. Anyway, yeah, I would say sin nature is another big one. In believing that humanity is inherently.
So let me ask you something. How did you define sin as an evangelical? And do you define sin now?
I don't believe in sin anymore. So to me, sin has become irrelevant. I understand conceptually how it's helpful, but by and large, sin as a function in my worldview has been weaponized and harmful. So I kind of get rid of the idea altogether. I don't engage with that. I don't think it's helpful. But before, in that past life, sin was anything that separated you from God, anything that was contrary to the nature of God. And because of my Bethel spin and this emphasis of spirit, it would have less been about express behavior or actions and more around intent. But now I'm like, there are lots of other reasons for why these things play out. And I don't think sin is the explanation for them.
The thing is like, so even using your definition of sin from evangelical days, for me, I never felt more closer to the experience of God with another human being than when I was with my now wife. And so that blew my mind. And even though I'm like I've been through a lot in my life. Even the first time briefly before we slept together, like I thought to myself, is this sinful? And that blew me away because intellectually, I did not think that at all. Because, like a lot of people that come out later in life, especially among women, we tend to be incredible allies before we come out. A lot of times our kids are gay, something like that. And people are just good allies. And so I was a good ally one. And so that blew my mind that I actually even thought that. And, I quickly dismissed it, but then I went back and I thought about it a lot afterwards. Yeah,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah. And then there's like 14 other big ones I would say, but those are like probably at the top.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. So now you and your consulting now is you just work with queer people, and what do you help them do?
So ultimately, it depends. But initially, it was like helping queer people come out, and that was like a big part of the work that I was doing. And it was really fun to like watch people do that terrifying, life changing, life ruining beginning. It's not as much that anymore. I miss it actually. I hope that I get more clients who like are trying to come out. But now I've got a lot of clients who are, I would say, coming out later in life, but they're in like their 30s and 40s.
Are they all evangelical?
Most of them are evangelical in the background. They're maybe not evangelicals anymore, but they were raised that way.
So they knew you from your evangelical
No,
days.
they found me on the internet, and then the rhetoric of my journey and what I'm talking about just resonates because of their experience.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
don't think anybody I work with now knew who I was before. That's not true. Some people do, but that's more in my group coaching spaces. And they've
Mhm.
been with me for a few years. So that's different. But anyway, so now the majority of the work that I do is with people, gay people, queer people, mostly working through their theology and how it contradicts who they know themselves to be. Like some of it's just like walking through like detangling and defanging what they believe. Like they know they don't want to believe this anymore, but they're not sure how to get out of it or not just throw it away by running away.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish.
And then the other main thing that I'm seeing with my clients is like gay men who are either recently divorced or navigating divorce or still married to a woman, trying to figure out like, what do I do? Working through their own like self advocacy and what's true and good and right and important for me in light of all these circumstances I find myself in. That's like another big theme that's come up. So, yeah.
So, Mike, I got to ask you, and we're going to wrap this up here, but did you have a coming out song?
I don't know that I did, but when I posted my video on Instagram that pointed to my coming out video, I used Raise Your Glass by Pink. And because it was just such a fun like anthem of
Fun song.
party. Yeah, it was like, yeah. So that, I mean, if there's any song that comes close, it's probably going to be that because that's what I used when I made the announcement. And that was like a pretty emotional moment for me. And it felt like the right vibe for what I was going for. So I guess that's my coming out song if I had one.
Any book or movie that really changed your life besides Taylor Swift's documentary?
God, literally Taylor Swift's documentary changed my life. I forever will have to say that.
We're going to have to, I'm going to tag Tay Tay and see if she.
Yeah, do it. Oh my God, I would die if I met Taylor Swift at some point in my life. Movie, or I mean, so many books changed my life. I would say one of the books that changed my life because of the theology stuff was The Bible Tells Me So by Peter Enns. I read a lot of great books before that, but that one had such a distinct, specific historical and contextual bent to it while still being like lighthearted and fun. And it just hit in a place that I needed. And that was instrumental for me. It was like a very helpful, secure step in letting go of what the Bible had to be in my life. That was a game changing moment for me. So that book was like what I was reading at that time that happened. I want to pick a movie though. Like what movie changed my, I don't know. Changed my life? Is that the question? Changed my life?
No, it changed your perspective on life. And I mean, like in the sense it can be about your queerness, but it can also be about something else. I mean, we're queer, but we're also so much more than that too,
Yeah.
right?
I don't know that I would say this changed my life, but it like hit me in a place. It's going to be two things. I watched the show Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu with Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington.
Mhm.
And that show hits so many different social conversations and it's like nuanced and layered and just does such a great job of like confronting privilege. And it just, again, like it was like probably the season of life that I was in. It was just hitting in all the right ways. It was like, God, this matters. And I've been part of a community of people who don't care about this stuff or erase this stuff and it's not okay. And then at the same time, like probably a few months later, I watched Promising Young Woman.
That's a really good movie.
Yeah, with Carey Mulligan. There was a moment where I was like,
You?
say it again.
Is it eye-opening to you?
It wasn't necessarily eye-opening, it was validating, specifically because through my coming out process, I watched a bunch of people ignore what I was saying and pretend like it didn't matter. Like it just didn't register as like worth caring about. And I couldn't believe that. I was just watching their behavior and attitude be like indifferent. And I'm like bearing my soul and sharing like the deepest, most costly things I've ever experienced in my life. And it just didn't faze them. And I couldn't believe that. And watching how heterosexism and homophobia treated queer people, it was becoming more and more incensed. And so when she was in that moment with like the university president or whatever, and like had her daughter in her car or like somewhere, she's like, oh, it doesn't matter when it happens to somebody else, but when it's your kid, it matters. I was like, that to me slapped. And I was like, thank you. Yes, that's exactly what people don't get. Like the empathy is not real until it happens to you. And then all of a sudden you care. Like that's not how empathy works. And to me, that was such a great, like poignant display of a rot in our morality today.
Yeah, there is definitely a rot in the morality of the evangelical church just because of who they support. And it must be so refreshing to be away from. Mike.
God, yeah, I had to. I don't it is refreshing, yeah.
The discussions around now there's trying to say that empathy is a sin, and I'm like, "God," it's like, "No, it's not a sin. We're actually, it's a really good quality to have."
Hope that stuff stays in the historical records forever and we can see how deranged this era of American evangelicalism was. It is unbelievable.
I've been an observer for years, but I have not been within the system, so I am really glad I haven't been in the system
Yeah,
anymore.
I can't. God, it's like living with a leash around your neck and it's too tight, and you're constantly having to like course correct and behavior modify and like cognitively dissonant your way through life. It's just so restrictive for all, and this is for people who are like measuring up and are the right identities and doing the right things. It is so restrictive. If the moment you violate anything important in that list of things you have to do and be, you're out. It's exhausting. It is not a way to live.
Mhm.
And I did it for over a decade. It was, yeah. Anyway, I am so thankful to not be part of that anymore.
How would you describe your life today?
Sometimes I like forget, because it becomes so normal. But moments like this, I get to remember, like, I remember not knowing what it meant to feel safe. And I didn't know that I didn't feel safe because I didn't know that was an option. And so when I came out and started advocating for myself and people like me, and I learned how to like stand up for myself and confront the bigotry and like expose the double standard and the hypocrisy within the things that were trying to like dehumanize me, I was like, "Oh my god, I will not tolerate people treating me this way again. I will not have people like this in my life anymore. I'm not gonna like co-conspire in my own diminishment anymore." And that was like really painful. That was probably one of the hardest things about all of this, was losing all of the people in my life that like are homophobic and don't know it. That was so
Well,
painful.
yeah, yeah, I understand.
Yeah. So painful, but a beautiful result of having done that work and paying that price is that I finally got to feel safe in my relationships, in my environment, in my day-to-day life. I'd wake up and go to sleep with safety as a part of my experience. And that was not true for literal decades of my life. And you don't notice anymore because you become so accustomed to just living in a survival state. But the moment that that's not a thing anymore, and you can tell the difference and you like realize what it's like to take a full breath. But I could never go back. I can't do it. It's not even an option anymore. But the only reason I survived for so long was because I didn't know that's what was happening.
So usually that's my last question, but I got to ask a follow up.
Okay.
Why did you feel so unsafe? Like now that you think about it, was it because of the hell and damnation from that first series? Like, why did you feel unsafe?
I walked away from the eternal conscious torment version of hell like 15 years ago. So I was
Even
in,
as an evangelical,
yeah, I mean,
say it.
I didn't say that out loud. I did hint at it though, and I did challenge it at times purposefully, and where I was like permitted that as long as I wasn't like drawing hard lines. But yeah, that was gone. So it wasn't the threat of hell. The thing that made me feel unsafe was the heterosexism slash homophobia that I just didn't recognize for so long because it was in me. I was heterosexist and homophobic.
Mhm.
And so I had to do work to unseat and dismantle that ideology within myself. But my identity was always contradictory to the values that I held, always, because of the environment I was raised in. So I felt unsafe because the moment something about me that was true that came out that didn't line up with how I was supposed to be, I would suffer rejection and shame and loss, which are like some of the highest priorities in like social belonging, right? So I was constantly navigating, towing a line of how free and authentic can I be without losing everything, which your options are very limited. So even the authenticity you are experiencing is contained and restricted. And I am a 4 on the Enneagram. I don't know if that registers for you, but like authenticity and individuality is like my highest priority and motivator in life. So being in the closet as a 4 is a death sentence. It's a prison. And not that it's worse for me than other people, but like I have such a high value for authenticity. I always have. And so I preached that and embodied it in all the ways I was allowed to, and then had to absolutely ignore it in one of the most significant parts of my identity. And so I think that's the answer, is like just constantly having to perform to survive.
One of the first things we do with the women that we work with, we have them identify their values because so many of us live counter to our values. And that's where the chaos reigns. And that's where the uncomfortableness reigns. So the first things we do is we ask people to like identify what your values are, because once you know your values, then a lot of the decisions you have to make about your life are pretty easy. Like, I have a very strong value about being really ethical. And so sometimes I'll think of doing like a little sneaky thing, you know, which is not like anything bad. But I'm always like, that's not very ethical. You shouldn't do that. And I know that when I go against that value of being ethical, I feel uncomfortable and I feel shitty. So it's my well-being is much better when I practice the ethicalness, like seriously, Mike, like if I mistakenly take something, this is, my Catholic upbringing, but like if like there's something in the bottom of my grocery cart that I didn't pay for, I will go back in and pay for it because that's where my ethical, like my wife's like, "Why are you doing that?" And I'm like, "I just will be so uncomfortable if I don't do that."
Yeah, you're doing it for your peace of mind. You
I'm
just gotta
doing
be able to live. Yeah, you have to live with yourself, totally.
So how do people find you?
Probably the biggest place to find me is on Instagram,
Okay.
but I'm also on TikTok and Facebook and YouTube. I have a podcast called Confessions of a Reformer, and then my website, MikeMaeshiro.com. Oh, and I'm also on Substack. I have a Substack that I publish every week.
All right.
All those places.
I know that's like me. I'm all over the place too. So Mike, thank you so much for coming on this program today. It was nice talking to you.
Likewise, thanks for having me on the show. I'm honored to be here.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories with Anne-Marie Zanzel. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzel.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzel.com.